So welcome to everyone to the Supra-Regional Roundtable. A few housekeeping rules before we start. We highly encourage you to indicate your full name in your profile and ask your questions in the chat box by indicating your name and saying also if you address your question to a person in particular to specify to whom. Depending on the time, you might have the possibility to ask your question directly, but since we are having a tendency to run rather late, it would be great if we can already have the questions in the chat box in any case, and then it's more sure that we can take them as well. The supra-regional roundtable that is involved in this conference on Southeast Asia aims to exchange on the questions that we addressed within the Southeast Asian framework with colleagues working in other places, so to explore whether there are significant regional differences in the ways in which academic researchers, practitioners, activists, and engaged citizens collaborate when it comes to doing collective ethnography, conducting interviews or surveys, collecting grievances, accessing archives, and involving populations through participatory programs. So there is a question like what possible biases condition the differences in approach, whether one is doing engaged research on social movements in Southeast Asia or in other regions such as Africa, the Middle East, or Europe. I am glad and honored to introduce Dr. Rosa Cordillera Castillo from Humboldt University, Berlin, who has kindly accepted to moderate this roundtable. Rosa is a socio-cultural anthropologist and an engaged scholar. She received her PhD from the Institute of Social and Cultural Anthropology and the Berlin Graduate School Muslim Cultures and Societies at Freie Universität Berlin. And she is currently a postdoc at the Institute for Asian and African Studies at Humboldt University, Berlin. And a visiting lecturer as well at the Institute of Cultural and Social Anthropology at the Freie Universität. Prior to moving to Berlin, Rosa was an assistant professor at the University of the Philippines, as well as an NGO worker and an activist working on indigenous people's rights. Rosa's anthropological research tackles with imagination and memory, peace and conflict studies, resistance and solidarity, and affect and emotions. Her dissertation, Being and Becoming, Imagination, Memory, and Violence in the Southern Philippines, provides ethnographic insights into the lives of Moros, specifically, and apologies for pronunciation, Maguindanaon, adherents of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, who have lived through violence and the liminality of uncertain peace in Cotabato region. Rosa has also been contributing to reflections on decoloniality, engaged research, and research ethics, notably pleading for the inclusion of ethical questions in the core of our research as social scientists. Among Rosa's numerous collective engagements, one can mention the Affect and Colonialism Web Lab that she co-created and co-leads, as well as the Philippines Studies Series Berlin platform that she founded and curates. So with this, I would like to hand it over to you, Rosa, and I would also like to, sorry for this technical thing, ask Gabrielle to put the recording on again, if you can, or Vincent. Okay, it's all fine, we are there.
All right, thank you so much, Catherine, for that kind introduction and also for the invitation to chair this roundtable discussion. Welcome everyone to today's panel. I see a couple of familiar faces from the Philippines. I'm very happy to see you here after such a long time. Actually, I've not seen some of the people here. Hi, Ma'am Mary and Ateneo. And also to see some of the colleagues who are also based in Germany. So I'd like to begin by saying that what we'll do with the roundtable discussion is each panelist will have 5 to 10 minutes to give some inputs. After that, we open the floor for questions and for comments. As I'm sure there's so many of you here in the audience of vast experience with engaged research, and I really look forward to an exciting and fruitful conversation. So I'd like to start with Sada Sari, who has a PhD in sociocultural anthropology from the University of Toronto. He recently completed his SSHRC postdoctoral fellowship at Wageningen University. His PhD research examines urban dynamics of the Kurdish struggle for self-determination in Diyarbakir, Kurdistan, and his postdoctoral studies look into the politics of youth in the Kurdish movement. Dr. Sari is currently the director of the Institute of Social Sciences at the University of Rojava. He has published in different journals and online publications and is actively engaged with grassroots solidarity movements in Canada and around the world. He has been interviewed by different mainstream and independent media organizations in different languages, and is also the host and producer of a podcast called The Kurdish Edition. So the floor is yours, Sada.
Thank you very much, Rosa. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm very honored to participate in this roundtable, to be part of your conference. Thank you, Catherine, for the invitation. So I would like to begin with a little bit expanding about what I did for my PhD, but the context of my research, and then maybe highlight some of the areas of what it means to be an engaged researcher or engaged anthropologist or public anthropologist, something that in North America we are very much used to. So as Rosa mentioned, my doctoral project was at the University of Toronto. I defended my thesis in 2020. For my thesis, I did my fieldwork in Diyarbakir in two periods, in 2015 and then later in 2016, 2017. So for those of you familiar with Turkey, that times was like a kind of a very troubling times in Kurdistan and in Turkey. So in 2015, there was an urban armed clashes in the Kurdish region of Turkey. Many cities declared autonomy against the Turkish state's violence against their communities, and that the state's response was brutal. Like basically, many cities were destroyed. Based on some data from Amnesty International, close to 500,000 people were displaced, hundreds were killed. So it was like a massive devastation in the Kurdish region. And then in 2016, there was a failed coup in Turkey, and my my fieldwork started right after that coup. So this is one of the aspects of the being engaged researcher about our work, that the timing. And this is a really interesting part, that I need to finish my fieldwork, I need to finish my studies, and at the same time there's a coup in Turkey, so and I have to go there. So and I did, despite what my supervisor and what everyone else was saying, and I spent close to 1 year in Diyarbakir from September 2016, just like a month after the coup, until fall of 2017. So it was during this time that the Turkish president Recep Tayyip Erdogan consolidated his power throughout Turkey, and I could see the birth of a dictatorial regime, and the state of emergency was declared. I was very lucky that I had a visiting researcher position at a university in Istanbul. So it was a very good cover for me, and also my ability to speak both Turkish and Kurdish was also an extra advantages, that I could basically present myself as somebody from Turkey, and having this cover that nobody would question what is Canadian guy doing, like in all of this turmoil and all of these happenings in Diyarbakir. So during that time, and my research was about the urban dynamics of the Kurdish movement. I was looking at municipalities, civil society organizations, how Kurds are organizing themselves, building autonomous spaces of like basically sociality, collective survival in Diyarbakir and other cities. And this urban shift in the Kurdish movement that started in 1999. I was looking at that, and I was working with many social projects of municipalities, Kurdish municipalities, and one of them was a food bank called Sarmashik. And the process of building all of that took more than a decade, from 1999 until 2015, 2016. And then the Turkish state came, and in the matter of 2-3 weeks, everything was shut down, everything was closed. So like one example that I could give was at that food bank, when a friend of mine called that we just heard that the door has been shut by authorities. Can you please come? Many people are at the door. They're waiting for their time to get their monthly food basket. So when I was there, like close to 50 women, mainly women with children, were around the food bank. Some of them were very, very upset, and they it was their really unlucky day. The door was shut. There was like a plump and like a notice that this center has been closed because of they're allegedly working with Kurdish terrorist organizations. So anyway, it was like a moment that we saw these people, and yes, thank you, Rosa. And we really didn't know what to do. So it was one of the moments that I realized I cannot be a mere observer, and I had to do something. And we basically we had a van, a truck, and then we were like, maybe we should just go and drive around and collect whatever we can, so these families won't go home empty-handed. So sometimes we needed to just go to some stores, like just present ourselves as Sarmashik food bank worker. And I was not a worker, I was like basically a researcher in working with them, and sometimes pay a little money to buy some stuff, and then just do something for that very day, and maybe in the evening think about what we can do the day after. At the same time, I drafted a letter in English, and I sent it around like a desperate call to international bodies that a food bank has been shut down, and this has real effect on the people's lives, under survival. So it was a moment for me that I was filled with guilt, with shame, and what am I doing as an observer around here? I have a funding, and I cannot do anything. And I'm probably going to write about that, and I'm going to talk about it in different gatherings like today. And I have no idea what happened to those people. I know that the food bank is closed, still closed, and the total shutdown against civil society, against any spaces of community organizing has been imposed on Diyarbakir and the Kurdish people in Turkey. So I have been struggling with that, with the what does the engagement of me as an anthropologist mean, while I'm probably going to talk about my experiences for the rest of my life, while there's this terrible stuff happening back in my field work. And the timing that I had to be there, and I had to work, to finish my work, and to go back to present it, to defend it, to write about it. And this guilt while I was in Diyarbakir kept me going to do something. But at the same time, a friend of mine at that food bank, when I shared my feelings, he said that this is very important that you are with us. At least we have a witness. At least we have we have someone that to observe that, to note all of that, to present that to other people. So it was. It's probably very simple, but something that that was helpful for me to deal with that. But the balance between engagement, observing, witnessing, and then writing, producing knowledge about that, producing theory about that. Throughout these years, I felt between all of these processes, there are gaps, and there are issues, and there are many aspects of discussions that I hope that this roundtable is a space to discuss all of that. So I'm going to leave it here. I'm very much looking forward to our discussions, to learn more about other contexts. Mine probably is a little bit extreme. The urgency of doing something was like out there. Probably in other contexts, this urgency is less. So I'm very much looking forward to hear your experiences. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sada, for sharing this harrowing experience in your research and highlighting the challenges, the struggles, the difficulties of being faced with such urgent, violent situation and finding ways to act to respond to the needs of our interlocutors. And I know a couple of people here, myself included, who've been confronted with similar issues in our research. So I hope that during the open forum, there will be space to deepen our engagement with the issues and experiences that you had shared with us. At this point, I would like to call on our next panelist, Birgit Müller. And here we shift the focus and also the region. So Birgit Müller has studied power relations and ideologies in post-socialist labor in Eastern Europe and in social and environmental movements in Europe and Latin America. Is currently conducting multi-sited research on agricultural policy design at the global and national levels and on farmers' practices at the local level in Nicaragua and Canada. Her books include Disenchantment with Market Economics, East Germans and Western Capitalism, and The Loss of Harmony, the Politics of Policymaking in Multilateral Organizations. Welcome, Birgit.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and for allowing me to change my experiences and points of view. And for me, it's a very important topic. This relationship between being an activist and at the same time a scholar. And I have had this. I've been feeling torn actually between these two identities several times during my different research projects, which have been often actually coming out of a political engagement that then took up so much space in my life that I was ultimately had to make a research topic out of it. And so one of those topics was, for example, the feeling I had in the 1990s when I was confronted with the issue of the patenting of life, the patenting of seeds, which was globalized through the treaty of the WTO, and in particular the TRIPS agreement. And so I became involved in associations mobilizing against the patenting of life, although it was not yet a topic at all that I was pursuing at the time. I was working on post-socialist transitions and in particular on the role of multinational corporations moving into Eastern Europe. So, but there was a link so this link was my concern about the growing power of multinational corporations and their takeover of the international food system. And so ultimately, my interest in the patenting of life, or my opposition to the patenting of life, brought me to the WTO, then to the FAO, then to the Committee on Food Security, where then in 2012, 2014, I was following the process on creating multilaterally principles on responsible investment. So this was a multilateral process where all governments that were part of the United Nations were involved or could be involved, and then as the Committee for Food Security was reformed, there was also a citizen committee and a private sector committee who were participating in these negotiations. So I entered the negotiations as negotiator, or I was entering the negotiations not as a negotiator, but as a sort of support person for the civil society organization, and was part of Friends of the Earth International. And so I was doing, obviously I had been doing some research on international organizations, but here I was also trying to negotiate, especially when issues on seeds came up in these negotiations. And so there were several problems involved in that. For first of all, I was extremely well engaged when seed issues came up, and there was no detached academic look on the processes anymore when I was really wanting to sway the outcome of the negotiations, and for example to bring the right to seeds for farmers to save their seeds up on the international agenda, so that I clearly intervened and lobbied and talked, and there was no way I could actually at the same time self-reflect about my position as a researcher in this very involved process. But of course, the difficulty of this position was really that at some moments it was useful for the movements and the civil society mechanisms that I did negotiate. In other moments, they wanted me out of this completely. In the third moment, they wanted me to analyze text and do a background work. So I experienced these 2 years where I regularly went to Rome to participate in these processes as an extremely difficult time for me, because I was constantly actually torn between different identities, and I often found myself actually on the wrong foot, so that I was becoming too involved, and then people said, "God, you get on our nerves. You go out of this space," or something like that. Keep back, And then sometimes it was totally useful that I was there, and they were happy that I did things. So in retrospect, when I look at that process afterwards, I was really looking at what had happened during these 2 years, and for the longest time I'd been unable to write anything about it, because at the same time I was also involved in the internal discussions and the conflicts inside the civil society mechanisms, which I didn't want to reveal. So anyway, this is my little story of in and out of the the role as an activist, an academic, and of course also a citizen.
Many thanks, Birgit, for sharing this and for also contributing to the discussion by highlighting the messiness and the complexities of having these multiple roles, having these multiple identities, multiple demands on us by ourselves, by our interlocutors, by institutions we engage with, by our professional career, by political engagement, by personal life, and engaging also with multilateral organizations and the complexities, the challenges, and the difficulties of these negotiations, of providing support to our interlocutors, but also the pitfalls of some of this. So it's such a complex negotiation that we can discuss in the open forum. Obviously, there's also a lot of people here who have very rich experiences as well on navigating this messiness and complexities. And with this, we go back to Southeast Asia. And I would like to call on to introduce Phong Huynh. And Phong is a rural development and commons-based approach expert, having graduated with a master's in social change and development from the University of Newcastle. He has been with GRET, an international organization, since 2012 in various capacities. His experience in implementing, developing, and adapting commons-based approach tools originate back to 2012 in facilitating the development of a bamboo value chains through the commons-based approach principles. As part of GRET's emphasis on supporting civil society organizations to become facilitators of communities' active participation in the shared governance of their resources, Phong has supported the development of a bamboo and NTFP, non-timber forest product, if I'm correct, development association, the first of its kind in Hua Phan province, I hope I pronounced that correctly, home of Lao PDR's communism or Pathet Lao. So Phong has had also numerous engagements as a rural development and commons-based approach expert. And with this, Phong, I give you the floor.
Okay, thank you. Again, thank you for the invitation to participate to the roundtable and to contribute to the discussion, and at the same time learn from everybody and your perspective on your academic and also your activism perspectives. Again, for those of you who are not sure, I'm in Lao PDR, which is a one-party state. It's a communist state, and my current role also is a focal point for the Commons program and also part of its international natural resources management international team. And in my different roles, I come from a very academic setting from a long time ago. I was a molecular biologist, and then I thought that was boring. So I changed to development because I thought it was more intriguing. And so I always bring that academic point of view, a little, I guess, the teacher's mindset to what I call facilitate the process that development work. Sometimes you need to have that aspect, the patience and everything. And in my different roles, I've been involved in a bamboo project. Rosa mentioned earlier, and I'm also part of supporting the wetland improvement and sanitation enhancement project in Lombabang. And Lombabang is one of the World Heritage Sites. So it's quite interesting, the differences. You have one bamboo in Hua Phan, which is the home of Lao communism. It is known it is very proud of this fact, and it has a very distinctive, it has a distinction of being able to not abide by national law, and it can dictate and translate the national law based on what the province prioritize. And then you go to more of the Lombabang, where it used to be the seat of the old royal family, which is much more, the pro-West, I would say, and it's more open. And because of that, it's part of the World Heritage Site, and it's introduced to many, different aspects of the capitalistic, more non-communist, principles. And I'm also involved in a commons program that covers very different countries. And so in Laos, we've been doing what we call the common-based approach, and I want to share a little bit. And what this does is that in our approach, we try to develop first a conceptual framework that has tools and methods for implementing this approach so that it can be adapted in the frame of development projects and within the context of where we work. And at the same time, we try to facilitate the development of what we call shared, inclusive, equitable, and evolving governance systems on the several types of commons for the commoners. So the idea would be that the governance systems that are co-created by the communities, we know the idea is that they should evolve based on their own reality and based on the social, economic, and also geopolitical changes. And our approach comes from the foundation of really empowering communities to manage their own resources. And in doing so, we try to integrate two aspects. One is what is a learned shared governance, in which the communities, they collectively develop and manage and decide on their own natural resources, services, and territories. These are what we call the commons. And the communities and also the farmer-based organizations that evolve or develop from that, they become very active actors in this shared governance structure that they develop. And the second aspect of this approach that we try to facilitate is what we call social dynamic organization. And the idea is that the communities, they instigate their own rules, development of their own rules and monitoring system, and then implement actions and then from that, they analyze and they adapt and improve on the methods, approach, and governance structures. And remember, this is within the context of a one-party state. So you need to negotiate in a way, support this mechanism in a one-party state. And although the authorities, they do participate to the multi-stakeholder discourses that involve the communities and other actors such as private sectors and even development partners and donors, right? The idea is in this approach is that they do not define the community's governance mechanisms. Instead, they contribute to reflections, but at the same time, by having the government involved, the communities are able to provide their own perspective and experience to these policymakers. And so since 2010, we have started developing this approach in Huapan first. And what we've tried to do and what we were able to do was that we were able to support that communities, they became actually for NTP, non-timber forest products, specifically bamboo. These communities that we were supporting, they became important actors in co-creating and co-developing their decision-making apparatus at different levels, from the village to the district. And then we also support support the multi-stakeholder workshops so that the communities can raise the concerns to the rest of the multi-stakeholder, including the government. And what we have noticed over 10 years, and this is where we're lucky because we have multiple phases of sponsorship, of funding. And what it allowed is that as the local government, they start to see that the communities through this shared governance system were effective in managing their own resources. And when they're able to manage their own resource and even implement collective actions, it alleviated their own administrative and financial responsibilities. Because as you know, Laos is one of the least developed countries in the world. So having, and especially Huapan, which is one of the poorest provinces, having this being shifted to more the community's responsibilities, they recognize there is an added value to this community's led governance. And once they recognize this, they figured that they should legitimize this process. Sorry, my daughter. And what they do is they legitimize this process by sharing this shared governance structure, by including it in their own provincial bamboo strategies, which for Hupan, this was the first in the province history and one of the first in Laos. And as these national government, this provincial government is now sharing this first provincial strategy, and also sharing their success to the national government, they start to make the national government recognize that there is some effectiveness in having this kind of shared governance and approach that were used at a provincial level. And once they recognize there is a role where CSO and farmers organization can alleviate their own concerns. They develop their own task force, and they develop their own national bamboo and rantan and NTAP action plan that actually included these kinds of collective decision-making processes and shared governing mechanisms. And so what this approach has allowed us to do is start to let us see that there is dynamic that could exist between the community's actors and the state, in which the state finds the actors as less threatening, but more as contributors toward the overall national goals, while the community's governance of their commons are legitimized through their contribution to the policymakers' discussions. Underlining all of this, it's very important that as facilitators, we do have our own political orientation, that our approach is to make sure the communities and the CSOs and farmers organizations are empowered to slowly have a space to contribute into the policy dialogues, because ultimately we understand that any work that is done would not be sustainable without policy, these actions being integrated in the policies, especially in the context of countries like Laos. Okay.
Thank you so much, Phong, and also for keeping within the time. It's such an important perspective to hear from somebody who's not actually straddling these tensions and challenges of an academic and doing engaged work, but doing engaged work that's nonetheless informed by your academic background, and how your organization, your work negotiated a kind of working relationship with government bodies and doing policy work, where you nonetheless have a participatory and community empowerment method. So we, again, can engage with this questions also later in terms of when we think about the various tensions, the various responsibilities, accountabilities that engaged scholars, and in your case, development workers have across contexts in various parts of the world, working with various kinds of government structures or multi-government structures as well. And I call on our last panelist at this point. And again, we shift focus and region. So Stéphane Tonnelat is a CNRS, or French National Center for Scientific Research, researcher at the LAVUE, Laboratory in Architecture, the City, Urban Planning, and the Environment. I cannot pronounce the French version of it, so I'm just translating it into English. I hope that's correct. So he's also doing research. He's a researcher at this laboratory, which is based at the Paris Nanterre University. He teaches ethnography at the EHES, School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences, in the master's program on environmental studies, and conducts ethnographic research on various types of urban public spaces and environmental mobilizations in Paris and New York. His main fields of investigation are urban interstices, so wastelands and empty lots, parks and gardens, subways and ferries, and lately suburban public space. His current work focuses on grassroots movements aimed at protecting agricultural land on the fringes of the Paris region from urbanization. His publications include International Express, New Yorkers on the 7th Train, co-authored with William Kornblum, and L'Art en Chantier, which is on the role of art on a construction site in the inner suburbs of Paris. Stefan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Can you all hear me and see me? Yeah, is it good?
Yes,
all right.
We do.
Thank you, Rosa, for the introduction. Like you said, I'm an ethnographer with the CNRS, which is a very comfortable position. The thing is, I have complete freedom over what I study. And I think this is something that's becoming a bit rare nowadays. Anyway, so for a number of years, like you said, I was studying urban spaces and how they were conceived, maintained, and used. And I was trying to convince the architects, but also planners, that they should pay better attention to the uses of public space and how users are actually making space. But more recently, I decided that I had to align my research with my own convictions, a sort of a reduction of my cognitive dissonance, if you want, and do research on environmental movements. This is important to me because that explains partly the idea of engaged ethnography. So for the last 6 years, I've been practicing a form of engaged ethnography of a grassroots movement in the suburbs of Paris, who has been mobilized to protect 700 hectares. I don't know how you translate that in other, but it's pretty big piece of land in the northern suburb of Paris between two airports, Charles de Gaulle, Roissy, that you probably have heard of or planned or landed in, and another private airport called Le Bourget. These lands haven't been built because as they're under the area where the planes take off and land, they're forbidden to housing because of the noise. Nowadays, this land is very much sought for by developers who want to build something there in this piece of green land in the middle of the city. So these grassroots movement has been struggling against that. The main project that was the reason for urbanizing there was called Europa City. It was a huge commercial and leisure center copied on an existing center similar in Dubai, I think. The idea was to merge the commercial centers together with the entertainment centers or leisure amusement parks to save a model that's now suffering, economically speaking. You know that France is the champion of huge big box stores. Anyway, so what's interesting is that this movement, after 10 years of struggle, has managed to cancel that project. The government canceled it. And so that shows the efficiency that a small grassroots movement can have against the public, private and public urban development, which is not small task. This project was like 3 billion euros investment. However, in the last, that was canceled in 2019. However, since then, the government is still pushing for a subway station in the middle of this agricultural land, which means that the government is planning to urbanize this land, because you don't put a subway station in the middle of land not to build anything there, right? So the movement is still engaged, but as the time passes and the construction is moving ahead, this grassroots movement, which was more used to using legal means of participation, you know, like a demonstration, a petition, a participation in public forums of consultation, or sometimes some less legal movements, such as blocking the construction site, access to the construction site. This movement has started to wonder whether those peaceful means of protestations are still efficient. And right now we have a movement, for example, last weekend there was a big movement in the Marais Poitevin region of France by Confédération Paysanne and other movements to stop the building of water reserves that are, in fact, water appropriation by big farmers. And as you know, we've had a very dry summer. The government has taxed these people of eco-terrorists, eco-terrorism, and has sent thousands of police to crack down on them. So there is a tension that's growing now very strongly between movements that were mostly peaceful and a government that's becoming less and less able to listen to these movements. Now, why do I say that? Because that changes things for the work that I do. As an engaged ethnographer, I was very welcome into that group. And as long as all the means of actions were legal or simple civil disobedience, there was no problem for me to be engaged. In a way, there was no much risk, or probably I was under surveillance by the Secret Service, but we all were. But there was no much risk. So now it's changing, right? People are starting to talk about sabotage. People are starting to talk about other ways of action. And how do we study that? How do I? Okay, I'm just going to finish on this. I had written a lot of other stuff that I didn't say, but anyway. So how do I position myself? Well, first of all, I'm nearing the end of this ethnography now. It's been 5 years, so how long can you do it? The main thing that I use for my guidance is the American Anthropologist Code of Professional Ethics. And not that it's perfect, but I find it very helpful to help me decide where I'm going to position myself in the field. For example, one thing I don't want to do is to exploit the group that I'm researching. And so I don't want to become a person I don't want to benefit, let's say, from my popularity or celebrity from this. So I avoid becoming a spokesperson, for example. But also, I don't want to be extractive in my research. Some people talk about extractivist research, right? So I want to be engaged. I want that my work benefits the people, the movement, but I don't want, so it's an exchange in a way. But I don't want to be also in the front line of a sabotage action where maybe I'll be arrested and my data be exposed. Right, so I'll probably be in the back line, in the back, or working with the legal group or working as a liaison with whatever, which means I'll still be engaged. But what it means is that there are many different positions that you can adopt as an engaged ethnographer in the field. And I think my position is not to be at the front of the action, but rather in the recess or whatever. But I can talk more about that. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Stefan, for sharing your experiences in your work in Paris and also your own evolution as a scholar and scholar activist or engaged scholar, engaged ethnographer, and actually highlighting the ways in which risks evolve in relation to our research and how that also shapes our engagement. So there is a temporal aspect to that, and those, of course, the various ways in which state forces, state actors respond to the work that we do, and the importance of non-exploitative, non-extractive research. And so it's a lot of discussion on finding ways to work alongside our interlocutors and to speak with them rather than for them, right? So all these discussions on decolonizing solidarity, decolonizing engagement are so pertinent to thinking about doing engaged research on a more equitable footing with our interlocutors. And with that, I'd like to thank all our panelists for your inputs, for your rich insights and sharing your experiences and questions your dilemmas, the tensions that that you face with, how you grappled with it, the methods that you've developed and the insights that you have. And I would like to open the floor now to comments and to questions from the audience. And as you know, I know people need a few minutes to gather their thoughts, but I would like to start with a question that was already posted in the chat a while ago. And this is for Sada from Alex. Horseman, Alex, are you still here? Would you rather speak up, or I guess he's not here?
I think, yeah, Alex mentioned he had to go on to teach, but since we are recording, I think it's still great if Sada can react to the question, even if Alex will listen to it later on.
All right, so so Sada, and also for the benefit of the rest of the audience, Alex's question is, he's very interested in your experiences, being consulted for advice in relation to human rights campaigns or peace building and your own involvement in this. Would you like to elaborate on this?
Sure. Well, thanks, Alex, for this comment and the questions. I think many of us have experienced that, like when we go to the field, we usually we try to find a gatekeeper and then do our research through some key people. And when it comes to the time that they need your skills, or they need your solidarity, or they need your support, or your advices, you become the gatekeeper for them to connect with the outside world. And some of the skills that we have, some of the networks that we have, like many times speaking just another language, English or French or another language, or having access to the media, having access to outside world, even skills of writing an email, writing, drafting a call, drafting something like a press release, becomes extremely beneficial for the people that you're working, depending on where you work and what group of people you are working with. In my case, as I said, there was like a very urgent times, state of emergency was declared. Like anything that I could have done would probably not be so beneficial, so helpful, because in a larger context, there was like a dictatorship in the process of making, in the process of establishing itself. But sometimes when you're desperate and you're there, and you know that your what you do probably is not going to change a lot of things, you still can provide this support. It's probably kind of the moral support that many times that we can provide. And this is one side of the research engagement with the people that we are working with. And even if we cannot change their conditions, probably we can be there. And one example is for the way that I saw how the people in Kurdistan, in Diyarbakir, were doing solidarity support work, was like to establish a sibling network of organization to organization, families to families, students to students. So people from outside, people who have better access to resources, to networks, could be sibling organization with an organization in Diyarbakir, or sibling family providing a little bit of financial help for those who are have been affected by the state violence. So it was one of the ways that I could consult with. Yeah, I'll stop here.
Thank you, Sada. I would have a follow-up question before I turn to Catherine's question, and this relates to, I mean, to anybody within the panel who, or even in the audience, who have been faced with security risks. Yeah, so risks to your life or to your family, to your networks, and also to your interlocutors because of the engaged research that you do. And how do you respond to these risks? You know, so engaged research really entails a lot of emotional labor, a lot of political and analytical work, and at the same time, constantly assessing and negotiating the multiple risks that we might face, particularly for those working on contexts of violence, and working with interlocutors or communities that have been subjected to violence. And this is an important, and very difficult aspect of engaged research. So I open that question to anybody within the panel who would like to engage with it, or even maybe within among the audience members. And you can, of course, also start, Sada, with it, having also already brought it up.
Yeah, I think as Philip said, the principle of AAA that do not harm. It was a kind of very, very important part of what I also had on my mind all the time. If somebody in my network, research participants, would get hurt from my research, that would be terrible for me. That would be disastrous for my research. So I was like extremely careful all the time, not to record anything, not to have notes. And in case that if I'm arrested or something, I can probably use the Canadian passport and being probably the worst case scenario, deported to Canada. But my main worry was like how to protect the people that I'm working with, the research participant. And your network, your language skills, and how you present yourself, they could all be sometimes like covers to protect you. But it really depends on circumstances and the environment.
Thank you. And Stefan?
Oh, sorry, not for the
yes,
second.
Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, to react to Sardar's comment, I think, as ethnographers, I'm highly schizophrenic, and I'm always between two positions, a researcher and an activist. And I think we have to work around that in the sense that, let's say there are two dangers. You could be arrested, say, as an activist for what you did, or you can be pursued by the government as a researcher so that you reveal your data, or you've been spied on, or called to testify on some, court of justice or something like that. Those are two different things, in my opinion. So we need to be careful to distinguish between the two. So that's why I was saying before, if I'm involved in an incident or an action where there might be some police repression, I'll try not to be arrested as an activist. That's one. And I'll try also not to be arrested as a researcher in order to protect my data. Like you said, you didn't record, you didn't take notes. I think those are extreme situations. Personally, I'll try to stick to situations where at least I can take notes, because otherwise I think my ethnography is going to be difficult to conduct. But anyway, but that's important to me to make this distinction, because like you said before, maybe our main role, and that's to maybe answer Catherine's question too, is to be a witness. Like you said, you use that word, and I like this word very much. And there's a great work by this guy, René Dulon, who wrote a book about it. But anyway, the thing is, it's also an epistemological position. The thing is that I don't consider that science, social science especially, is going to bring any solution to the by itself, all alone, to the challenges that we're facing today. But what ethnography can do is it can document some of the actions and innovations and inventions that movements, grassroots movements and others are trying to put in action everywhere in the world. And that's where we're good at, right? So I think we're good at documenting that and letting it known, right? But that means that there is no, and that's a critique of some of the French sociology there is no epistemological break between my knowledge, the scientific knowledge, and the knowledge of the people in the field. There are just differences in terms of depth or techniques of analysis. Like Clifford Geertz was saying, you know, I love this expression, he was saying there are knowledge is close to experience and knowledge is remote from the experience. The people who are in the action are close to the experience, and we are trying to get a little more remote so that we can have a more conceptual analysis of what's going on and then share with other movements, other scholars around. That's what Geertz was saying anyway. But anyway, so I like this idea of witness that you mentioned. And so what pushed me to change, like you said, Catherine, that was precisely this question. I wanted to document. Right.
Thanks.
Thank you, Stefan, and also for already addressing Catherine's question, which is put there in the chat, and maybe just to also throw in there that this notion of anthropological witnessing that Nancy Sheffer used had also written about, right? It's also a very powerful statement where the anthropologist is positioned as a responsive, reflexive, and morally, politically committed being, right? So to quote from her and Bourgois, but that of course is how to be a witness in this sense. Witness not as a detached witness, right? But actually as somebody who is responsive, is also filled with challenges and with tensions, negotiations, and navigations. I'd like to call on Zina, and then after that, Ma'am Mary. Yes, Zina.
Yes, thank you very much for this really highly stimulating discussion. I was just wondering, there's on one hand the security and the safety while doing research in these settings, but then there's also the safety of our interlocutors, and that can really bring us into dilemmas, because I was doing my PhD work in the middle of a hostage taking of parliament in Fiji and a military coup and an ongoing crisis. And I worked with one of the prominent women's organizations at that time. Now, Fiji is small. It altogether has a population of not even 1 million. Everyone knows everyone, especially in civil society, but also across through kinship lines and whatever. And I really had a problem. Even if I would anonymize my data, everyone would be knowing who am I talking about. So what do we do in these situations? I basically only started writing about this after a decade. I mean, I put the PhD out. This was before every PhD went online. So it could be held in the ANU vaults, so to speak, and given out, with consent. Then later on it went online, but I could have never made this publicly available right at the beginning because I would have endangered people. The political situation in Fiji had to change before I could push that material out. Yeah, so this is just a comment and a question, basically, especially in a time when everyone has to be so prolific, which wasn't so much 20 years ago, and has to publish 3 articles a year and has to publish during the PhD. How do you do that?
Oh, great point, and also points to the academic systems in which we work. So on the one hand, there's already parts of academia that says we shouldn't do engaged work anyway, and then also, like broadly speaking, also all these demands on productivity, right? That does not take into account the difficulties of the research that we do and the security risks that many of us also face. And the choices we need to make in terms of what data comes out and what remains hidden for the time being. Before I open the floor to others' responses, I'd like to call on Professor Raselis.
Hi, thank you, Rosa. Nice to be with you again after several years. I find this a very stimulating set of issues because I've lived with this really all my life, practically, in anthropology. Just what I wanted to get across the notion that positionality evolves, right? I think we've all seen that. At the beginning, it doesn't seem like something you're interested in people, but because you stay with them, and anthropologists usually do over time, and you begin to interact with them in increasingly different ways, and their expectations of you become clearer once they trust you, right? I think, and being with them in whatever category you identify yourself, and they trust you. If you're an academic, they know you write. That's what I do, I write, but they know I write sympathetically about them to try to convince the authorities that they're not criminals, but they're ordinary people trying to make a living, that kind of thing. So you build up that kind, that's kind of the middle level. But when I was on the foreshore, which is this was a notorious place, in public mind, that's where all the criminals are and the prostitutes and the drug gang, etc. When I began to write about it as ordinary people, then it got published, fine. But then the local community organizers next door in the informal settlement where they were illegal and being harassed said, it's very nice that you talk sympathetically about us, but really, we're organizing communities so they speak for themselves. So they were telling me kind of nicely, stop trying to represent us, which I thought I was sort of doing, and that was a good thing, because I was doing good things to convince the authorities that these are good people, etc. So I was stunned, but when I said, what do I do? They said, just come to our meetings, come to our mobilizations. If you want to write about it, fine, but always check with us what you're going to say. We want to know what you're going to say. So that was a process. But once they trust you, you can almost say anything because they know that you're on their side, but that you're trying to take a distance, and they recognize the value of it because they need people like us who are in the middle, who have influence of some kinds in government, who also know that we do not speak for them. And we always say that. No, you should. When they asked me, I said, talk to the community. I can connect with you and so on. So that's one. Let me say the other story very quickly, I hope, is there comes a moment of truth often. Well, I think like Sardar said, you think I was operating very well in this, and the communities were organized during martial law, very authoritarian, repressive government. But because they were organizing peacefully, but very effectively, they were getting a lot of concessions from government. But then the left parties began to come in and organize also. So the military began to get worried about this community area, huge area. And they arrested the community leader, the #1 leader, who was a very good friend of mine, and because I had always connected with her on strategies and and so on. And so she's in jail. We heard they were torturing her. And so all of a sudden I get a call from human rights lawyers who would normally defend people like that for free, saying, please come and see us. So 2 of us, another social worker who was on the board of the community organizing, supporting that process, went, and the lawyer said, can you 2 write 2 articles that we will file in court with the military court to say that community organizing is not a communist or thing, right? That it is valid. So that Teresita Palacios, who was the other one, and they said, think about it, let us know tonight, please, because we have to submit it to the military court. The 2 of us were terrified because of the times you could get arrested and tortured and whatnot. We had no idea. And so we talked about it. Both our husbands never knew how much involved we were in the community. That was another thing. What about our families? But after discussing it, the 2 of us said, we have to do this. If we don't do it, we should never again appear in that community, nor should we ever attempt to think of ourselves or classify ourselves as engaged anthropology. Why? Because in the moment of truth, when only you could do that, because we were the only 2 social scientists in the community, if we don't do it, nobody else can. And we betray our leader with whom we're fused. So there comes a time when there's a moment of truth you have to decide. And I can see that some would have said, look, my family is important, I have to get out of this. But then you lose your social science credibility, at least among NGO sector. You can retreat back to university and never go back to the community, but you know that your whole life you will regret it forever, right? So those are the things that can happen because of the turmoil that I think all of you have seen in this. You know? So it's a risk that you have, and it's really only an individual situation. You can't predict it. It happens, and that's when you have to decide. But you have to have a certain set of moral principles in order to guide you. That's it.
Thank you so much also for that very rich and stimulating and disturbing all at the same time development, of course, talking about authoritarian government systems at that time, the martial law during the 70s in the Philippines, dictatorships, also very much shaped the kind of engaged work we do, and the multiple the different kinds of engagements that you've highlighted, and the panelists and Zina have highlighted the different ways in which we can actually engage with our interlocutors, depending also on the context and on the situation and on the urgency, right? There's always this temporal aspect about it. Fong, would you like to intervene?
Sure. I think it's very interesting, all comments we've made before, because I think it also cross with practitioners, you know, with INGOs and working with especially civil society, you know, is I think that it echoes. You always have to keep a balanced perspective of you know, your power dynamic and where you are, and your responsibility to community and the CSOs and the farmers that you work with. Because, and this is something I always remind my colleagues, you know, whether we go to Myanmar for missions or whatever, is that we, at the end, our passport, my American passport, does afford me certain protection that our national colleagues do not have. So we always need to keep that perspective. And then when we do work in the field, with the communities that we work with, we need to always maintain the language and the way where if the government, you know, either the Burmese junta or, you know, Lao government, they assign, say, some plane, it brings to us and less to the communities, less to our national colleagues, because at the end of the day, is some of these ideas, you know, some of these, you know, the commons, the rights, the bundle of rights that we are trying to do, they're new in some of these countries, or they're foreign to the government and they're threatening to the government. So you need to have to keep that perspective. And while you're working and you're introducing this, and I like that idea, what you said about trust, you do have to develop a lot of trust in you know, so that people know that, one, what you're doing, you're willing to absorb the blame, and secondly, you are willing to be that it keeps their perspective in mind, all right? And third is that it doesn't at the end of the day, they don't suffer from it, right? So I think it's always important, and it's interesting, and I'll tell you why. For me, it's interesting, Catherine's question. Why I'm in development. Many years ago, I did you know, molecular cell biology research, but on endocrinology for crustaceans, where we were testing different you know, chemicals, alkylphenols, you know, the things that line out, you know, Coca-Cola bottles, all these bottles. And I remember our lab, you know, we had a lot of funding from NIH, from, you know, National Institute of Health, you know, National Cancer Science Foundation. And, you know, because we were highlighting the potential of these pollutants into the ocean, which then affects, you know, juvenile hormones, you know, hormones in the crustaceans, hormones that have analogy to humans, right? And I remember our funding at one point, these you know, government fund donors, they said, we don't have enough funding. You need to go to the private sector. You need to go to the Pfizer. I remember Pfizer was big, right? And we said, these guys, the point of these guys is not having these kind of results. I mean, you know, our results are being passed to National Sea Grant. We have to on all of these things so that there could be some collective action. There are some environmental actions. But if you were going to them and we have to orient our funding so that, you know, you have to answer to, you know, to these private sector, you're not doing what, you know, your lab is intended to do. So, you know, and we continue to say, no, we're going to keep to our principles. And then, so we went from 2.5 million per year to 250,000 per year, which at that time I was leading that lab as, you know, for molecular biology, it basically doesn't, you know, it allows you to buy spit, you know, and that's it. There's not much you can do. So based on that, I said, wow, you know, this is not a good way. So I switched to development. But when I entered development, and this is the warning I continue to give to my colleagues in development who doesn't have academic and research background. I said, you know, this is our concern too, because slowly, you know, the EU and the AFD, all these donors, they will start to say, and they start to say, go to the World Bank, you know, go to the ADB, Asian Development Bank, right? Because we, you know, if you want to do, we're going to have budgetary constraint. And I said, look, eventually, what this does is development is going to have to cater to these private sector. And I think, but I think our role of facilitator academics, and this is where academics play a role, and I had a discussion, you know, with in the previous workshop, is that, you know, we need to work together. I think it's highlighting together from the ground and from the academic point of view, so that it create enough critical mass of knowledge and information out there from different aspects of, you know, point of views, right? So that it becomes an echo in their consciousness, in the donors' consciousness, in the public sector consciousness, so that, and policymaker consciousness. So it maybe eventually affect change, right? But not at the cost of our national colleagues and our you know, our partners on the ground.
Thank you so much, Phong. Before I call on Birgit and also the question that's posted in the chat, I wanted to actually also highlight it from the various presentations earlier of the different privileges, protection, vulnerabilities, and power that we hold, and how that impacts our forms of engagement and the risks and the stakes, the responsibilities, accountabilities, and legitimacy of the work that we do. And I think it's really important to have these nuances also when we think about engaged research. Birgit, please go ahead.
Yes, I would like actually to address this question again. That transpired a little bit in Fon's intervention. Who has actually the handle, or who has actually the hand in what is put out, what is expressed in this research? And so, if I go back to the example that I was giving you with these negotiations in the Committee for Food Security, there was clearly actually a hierarchy of legitimacy inside this committee between the social movements, who were clearly those who were allowed to speak, and then there were the NGOs that were those that were in the know of legal texts, maybe of procedures, maybe had a long-term perspective, but they were actually supposed to assist, and then the academics that in a way constantly had to demonstrate their usefulness for the cause, but the issue was actually one of who was leading the cause in a way, who was carrying the engagement forward were clearly the social movements. So in a way, so what ultimately can an academic do in such a situation, which is actually more well, is actually a plus, and there we come actually to the question of scalability. I think what is important, what an academic can do maybe also after the fact, is to offer context, historical depth, comparison with processes unfolding on different scales in different places, for instance. And then, for example, in this case at the Committee for Food Security, what was, for example, an interesting and important issue, which then appeared in many other fields that I was doing political anthropology in, was the issue of the rise of multi-stakeholder processes in international governance, in local governance, and how these processes were weakening local democracy, but also human rights on the UN level. So there, I think then building an analysis as an academic could then actually, from this perspective, feed back to the movements and allow them to use that to develop a stronger voice and to avoid sort of strategic traps of that process.
Thank you so much for that, Birgit, and also providing us insights into the complexities of dealing with multiple stakeholders, multilateral organizations. And to me, another concern is, of course, how do we communicate with our partners, with our interlocutors? How do we have a participatory process? Fong's work had pointed to this in such a way that we do this engagement together, right? It has been raised, this question of speaking with, alongside rather than speaking for. And this is really a strategic question as well. And there's a very important point also raised by Herlambang Wiratraman. I hope I pronounce your name correctly in the chat. Would you rather speak up if you are here in the Zoom room? Would you like to say this? Oh, thank you. Please go ahead.
Herlambang is here with us in Paris, so that makes things easier.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
for that.
Thank you, Catherine and Rosa. Yes, actually, you know, 1st to 3rd November, I have two conferences at the same time here in Paris, Bangkok, about ALTERSEA, and also Global Young Academy in Arizona. So also the last day for today, but different time. So that will be enable me to come to conferences. The point that I would like to say, this is related to solidarity beyond engaging research. Why? As I mentioned in the chat box, that actually, of course, we are now facing a more difficult situation because of declining democracy. And I can provide in detail about Indonesia. It is getting more difficult or uneasy situation because, you know, perhaps the case of Eric Meyers, just recently, Eric Meyers and friends actually from Netherlands, because due to his writing on the media, Jakarta Post, and he was banned to enter Indonesia by the Ministry of Forestry and Environment. And it was about data actually, and there is no the way to resolve or making sort of like consensus brief without dialogue and so on. Then this is the way the government to silence researchers or scholars. And really unfortunate, not so many scholars speak up on this issue, including from our counterpart in the Europe. Yeah. So that is also a serious problem for us. If we we are discussing about social movement, but we are really limited in response to solidarity in that sense. The other case also recently happened. This is related to our colleagues in Norway. I mean, in Norway, we have the government just signed MOU between Norway and Indonesia, and based on that MOU, also limits the expression of researchers or scientists to publish their works to the public. That is also sort of like what we call secrecy clauses. And because of secrecy clauses, of course, this is also limit, what is that? The limit of freedom of expressions or opinion carried by the scholars, either in Indonesia as well as in Europe, especially in Norway. So hence, I would like to say, engaging research, in my opinion, needs a larger solidarity in voicing and strengthening academic freedom. This is not the problem of particular country, but also common concern in region, even in international network. And thinking about social movement in this regard means promoting stronger defense for protecting scholars. So I just want to say like this, it might be becoming a common concern on this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Helena.
Thank you so much. And I think that's a good point, good note to wrap up this session. And I'd just like to highlight some points that were raised. So the hierarchies of legitimacies, Birgit had pointed to the various responsibilities and accountabilities that we hold as engaged scholars or as development workers, that nonetheless shift according to context, to urgencies, to risks, to our own personal situations and motivations, and how our shifting positionalities and engagements also necessitate self-reflexivity, which is not always an easy or tension-free exercise, especially in the face of multiple demands, multiple requests from various interlocutors, and also evolving security risks and harms to ourselves and to our interlocutors. And each of us are in various ways positioned also in terms of power, in terms of protection, in terms of privilege. Somebody who holds a US passport is much more protected than, for instance, a scholar like Lambang, or somebody who doesn't hold, I assume, right, who doesn't hold such a passport and who are based in certain parts of the world where the risks are very urgent. The importance of building trust and dealing with and responding to and pushing back against certain pressures, whether it comes from funding pressures or academic pressures on the one hand, we all should be quote unquote neutral or objective academics and also be productive, and then also dealing with the multiple engagements we have with our interlocutors and our own motivation to respond to the urgencies and to the needs of our interlocutors, where many academic institutions do not necessarily recognize that kind of work, depending on where you are positioned in the world. And kind of the multiple engagements that we have with multiple stakeholders. We heard a lot of rich and stimulating contributions on this and the ethics of our research. And so, of course, there were much more that were discussed and that were shared with us. And I'd like to just end with Lambang's point also on the need for protection and for solidarity, where it is also, in my opinion, in the collective where we can also gather strength as engaged scholars of working together and supporting each other with the difficulties and the challenges and the tensions that this kind of academic work entails. It's so much easier to be an ivory tower scholar, right? You don't have to deal with these tensions. You don't have to deal with this risk. You don't have to, but we're not ivory tower scholars. And I think this is where, yes, solidarity and panels like this and collective action contribute a lot as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Thank you so much to the panelists for such stimulating sharing. Thank you so much to those who have given their comments and their questions. Thank you to Catherine also for helping along with the technical aspect. Just to mention, you see it also in the chat, that the next session will be keynote address by Professor Mary Rosales, and the chairperson is Noreen Sapalo. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rosa, for this wonderful moderation. And I think there's nothing to add to your very comprehensive, conclusive thoughts, rather than that. At least for me, it has been a real pleasure and a very important moment to listen to all of you. And as you just said, in terms of strength that it can give you, there is already just the point that one isn't alone in this situation, and the solidarity that is going way beyond Southeast Asia, as we can see in this panel. So thanks a lot, Rosa, for chairing this and for your very valuable contributions. I wanted to add in the chat one publication by you that very nicely deals with the expectations that we have to go public, as I forgot who Sina said, the need to put all our PhDs online, for instance, and the questions that this and other requests with open science and so on and so forth provoke. But maybe we have time to put that up in the chat box soon. I would just like to conclude on another thanks that I forgot, and I'm sorry about this. FAO has been hosting this panel, but the Asia Research Institute in Singapore with Michelle Miller online with us has been the backup institution for this. So thanks, Ari, as well. And with this, I would say we are getting ready for the keynote, making people co-hosts and the like. So please give us a couple of minutes to be all set up to listen to Professor Mary Rosales in just a few minutes. Thanks again to everyone.